In this episode, we talk about the government's crackdown on the farmers' protest last week. We also talk about the comedian Kunal Kamra and the political row his latest stand-up set has triggered. But first, we talk about the controversy surrounding Justice Yashwant Varma. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last week, after a fire broke out at the residence of Delhi High Court Judge Justice Yashwant Varma, reports came to light alleging that sacks of burnt cash were also found on the premises. Over the weekend, a video of the charred property and the bundles of cash went viral, triggering a major political storm. Now, as these allegations were fueling speculation, the Supreme Court, in an unprecedented move, made the matter public and constituted a 3-member panel to conduct an in-house inquiry. When we spoke to the Indian Express's national legal editor, Apurva Vishwanath, she told us when the information first came to light.
So the sequence of events actually begins from the 14th of March, but the story in that sense really broke out on Friday when Times of India published a report that half-burnt wads of cash were found at a Delhi High Court judge's house. This is Justice Yashwant Varma, who is third in seniority in the High Court. He was originally from the Allahabad High Court, that's his parent High Court, and he was transferred to Delhi sometime in 2022. And he's an important judge, as in terms of seniority, he's a member of the Collegium, and he has about 8 years ahead of him before he retires as a High Court judge, if he's not elevated to the Supreme Court. Well, now, of course, I think those doors are closed.
Now, she says that when the story first broke, there was widespread speculation, both about the amount of cash found and why it was there in the first place.
The story also had a line that the judge was not in town and someone else made the call to the fire department when the incident happened. So a lot of unanswered questions which gave rise to speculation and rumor mongering. So eventually the Supreme Court decided to put all of this in the public domain. So whatever the allegation was that they had been informed by the Delhi police through official channels, that is the Delhi Commissioner Sanjay Arora would have called the Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, Justice Devendra Upadhyay, and then the Chief Justice in turn would have apprised the Chief Justice of India. So all of this, they just decided to put it out in public domain.
And Apurva, how rare would you say this was?
Yeah, so this is an unprecedented move, right? We've had issues of impropriety, of, judicial probity and integrity questions raised earlier. Even this instance of cash at a judge's house has happened a few times before. In Punjab and Haryana a few years ago, there were 2 judges who shared the same name, and the cash incidentally was apparently delivered to the wrong judge who also has the same name. So these things have happened, but, putting it all out in public domain is an exemplary decision, much needed also because over the weekend, things had really taken a bad turn. And of course, as Parliament session ongoing, Vice-President Jagdeep Dhankhar, no less, did bring it up in the Rajya Sabha and spoke about it and said, had this been a politician or a bureaucrat or a businessman, things would have been dealt very differently. So when there are larger questions of the institution that are being raised, it's better that everything's, out. But of course, the video which shows purportedly half-burnt cash in the judge's house, that being put in public domain is quite unprecedented.
Right, and while the story started dominating news headlines on Friday, it was only later that we found out that the fire had actually broken out on the 14th of March. But when we talk about the timeline that was put out by the Supreme Court, tell us what stood out to you about that.
So, there are many, many unanswered questions about this. And hopefully when the in-house committee meets, these things will be clearer. And these are all now going to be subject of investigation. But just in terms of, let's flag some of those unanswered questions, looking at the timeline. So on March 14th at night, about 11:30 and after that, a call was made to the police that a fire had broken out in the judge's residence. So now the judge was not in town. Justice Varma and his wife were both apparently traveling to Bhopal. So it is the judge's PS who made the call to the police. A separate call to the fire department was not made, but the police would have called the fire brigade and both of them reached the spot. And it seems that the fire broke out in an outhouse of the judge's bungalow. So, these are large Lutyens bungalows that the judges get as official residences. So, apart from the living quarters where the judge and their family actually reside, there are rooms which are occupied by staff and there is security. And at the back, there is a servant quarters. So this outhouse, according to the judge, was a place used for storing all and sundry stuff, which is, old mattresses, furniture, crockery, and things like that. And the judge says that this room was accessible to the staff.
Basically gardeners, the security staff, the CRPF, and other people working at the residence.
But the police commissioner's version to the Chief Justice says that this room was kept under lock and key. So now a preliminary report of the fire department says that the cause of the fire was a short circuit. But it seems the short circuit was contained only to that room and no other part of the judge's house is affected. At least that's not something we've heard on record. The fire was contained to that one room, outhouse. So now in that room, the video shows that there are sacks of cash that are being pulled out. These are 500 rupee notes. And in fact, one fireman or somebody else in that video says, Mahatma Gandhi mein aag lag gayi.
Mahatma Gandhi mein aag lag rahi hai bhai.
So they're clearly aware of the gravity of the situation.
And Apurva, now of course this video has become viral. But do we know how it became public?
So, the firemen or the police, whoever made that video, must have sent it to their superiors. It traveled up to the Delhi police commissioner. And what we know from the record is that on the evening of 15th, that is a day later, the police commissioner called Justice Upadhyay, who was also incidentally out of town because it was Holi, right? And he informed the Chief Justice that cash was found, there was a fire, and apparently sent the video to him on WhatsApp. And 15th evening is when Justice Varma also returned from Bhopal. So now, there's already a 20-hour gap here. What happened in those 20 hours is really a big burning question.
Now, another major allegation in this case is that some of the debris, including the burnt cash, was moved out on the morning of the 15th. That is, a day after the fire broke out.
At least this is what the police commissioner says to the Chief Justice. And it is a specific question that the Chief Justice of India asks of Justice Varma. Who moved the cash, the half-burnt cash, from the site of incident on the morning of 15th? On his side, Justice Varma, of course, first has an alibi that he was not there. And then he has two lines of defense. First, he says that he has no idea about any cash there. That at night of the time of the incident, his daughter and his aged mother were in the house. His daughter was not shown that there was any cash found, nor was his personal secretary. He says, I've made my own inquiries and neither my daughter nor my secretary were made aware that there was any cash that was recovered.
So according to Justice Varma, there was no cash at his house. But then we are left with the question, what about the video?
So one, if the authenticity of the video is established, that it was indeed taken that night at the judge's residence, so then that explanation will have to come about. Where did the cash then go? As far as the commissioner's report that some of it was moved on the morning of 15th, Justice Varma says only salvageable stuff was removed from that room by his staff, which is still now kept in a different portion of his house. And he says there's no cash there. So I don't know what cash you guys are talking about, in a sense. So the unanswered questions here really are, that night when they found cash, a video was made. Did the police just call it a night and go back home? Did they leave it to the security of the judge? The next morning, was someone there? Then if the debris was moved, we're talking about a judge's house in a high security zone in Delhi. So where did the debris move to? There must be CCTV footage of the judge's house, the gate, everything, right? So, and there is usually a log book as well about who's coming in and going out. The Chief Justice in his report, preliminary report again, says that he does not think anybody from outside came in either on the night of 14th or on 15th. So if nobody from the outside came in, then who had access to the place regularly otherwise? Did they move any of it?
And so at this point, are we just relying on that video then?
At this point, yes, we are relying on that video, but the chain of custody of that video involves the commissioner of the Delhi police. And that is a key person, and not someone who would do it frivolously. So the commissioner must have made his preliminary inquiries, even probably spoken to his higher ups in the Home Ministry before informing the Chief Justice of the High Court. Because a judge's residence is not, some random house that you tender to at night when a fire breaks out. So there must be a log of who went to douse the fire there, how many cops from Tughlaq Road, because, remember that the call was made to the police. So there must be cops from Tughlaq Road police station who would have also gone. So they will all have to be questioned, examined, and that's how you establish the chain of events.
Okay, so we have talked about the Supreme Court making public the timeline of events. But the other thing it does is that it constitutes a 3-member panel for an in-house inquiry.
So constitutionally, that is the process for addressing allegations against a judge. So it's not as if an FIR can be filed and investigated. Now, the judge's version is that he has no idea who brought that cash in, and he says he categorically denies that neither he nor his family had put any cash in that room. So in that case, it has to be led by evidence. So the procedure for that is an in-house inquiry committee according to the Judges Inquiry Act. In many cases, this is the first step towards an impeachment if a finding of guilt is made out. So before that, an inquiry panel is constituted. In the meantime, Justice Varma has been stripped of any judicial work. That means he will no longer sit and decide cases in the Delhi High Court, which is also quite consequential. It's a serious thing because he's a judge of a constitutional court, right? They do enjoy some protections and privileges, but this situation is also quite grave. The allegation is quite grave. So now, till the inquiry comes to a finding, he cannot be sitting in court. Of course, the collegium tried to initially transfer him out of Delhi as a first measure, possibly, because punitive transfers is something that happens in the collegium routinely.
She says that while in this case there is a video, in most allegations of corruption, that is not the case. And so it is very hard to establish any concrete evidence against a judge.
Because these all, of course, happen in a hush-hush manner. So for the collegium to collect evidence and then take action is very difficult. So the collegium relies on what it calls punitive transfers. So, they usually send them off packing to a court in the Northeast or somewhere else. In fact, a couple of years ago, a lot of judges were being transferred to Patna. And I asked someone during my reportage, I said, but why Patna? And they said, because that's where you can't make money. There aren't a lot of high stakes cases in that court. So, some of it. So punitive transfers has been a systemic problem in this collegium. So when the collegium tried to do that with Justice Varma, the Allahabad High Court bar was very quick to respond and said they will not take a tainted judge to their high court.
But besides the question of where Justice Varma will be repatriated, Apurva says that the Supreme Court taking steps to make all the information public and forming a committee was a step to end speculations and make the entire affair more transparent.
This is an institution that is more and more in public glare. The digital courtrooms have brought the judges, their faces to our hands. There are YouTube shorts. They are in your television screens, in your living rooms. So when there is this heightened sense of public scrutiny, the old methods don't work anymore. You have to appear completely above the board. And it's not just that, the court takes actions, but should also be seen to be taking those actions. So in that context, putting it out in, public domain, in a sense, controls the narrative, ends the speculation about, what it really was, or whether there was a video, whether there wasn't a video. All of these questions are then sort of out in public domain.
And Apurva, politically speaking, the members of the ruling party as well as the opposition have now raised concerns about this case. And Vice-President Jagdeep Dhankhar has once again brought attention to the NJAC, the National Judicial Appointments Commission, an act which was passed by the parliament in 2014 and which actually was supported by politicians from across party lines, but was later struck down by the Supreme Court because it felt it encroached on judicial independence. And to understand the NJAC, I think our listeners also need to understand how judicial appointments work. Right now, they work through the collegium system. For instance, for the judges of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of India, along with 4 senior-most Supreme Court judges, they decide on the appointments and transfers. And similarly, high courts have collegiums as well. Now, in the system, the government role is limited. It can object to a suggestion made by the collegium, but if the collegium insists, then the government by law has to accept that appointment.
Well, that's in practice, but there is a huge tug of war, a constant tug of war that happens here. By law, the government is bound to appoint, but we have a number of instances where the government has simply refused to follow that. The government has sat on these appointments. And this constant tussle is friction between the institutions. And now when, the stakes change or when something else happens, it's obviously going to raise a lot of questions.
Right, the government can say, well, this is why the collegium system doesn't work. And now in that sense, the NJAC is different because under it, the commission was to comprise of the Chief Justice of India, 2 senior-most Supreme Court judges, the Union Minister of Law and Justice, and 2 eminent persons from civil society, one of whom would be appointed by a committee consisting of the CJI, Prime Minister, and the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, and the other would be nominated from the SC, ST, OBC, minority communities, or women. So with this issue back in the fore again, and we know, of course, that the Supreme Court had struck it down, but can the government bring it back again?
So in 2015, after the verdict came, the government decided not to seek a review of the judgment because the court had struck it down on the grounds that it violates the basic structure of the constitution. Judicial independence is a part of that basic structure. So because the NJAC law was drafted in a manner where it tilted more or slightly more in favor of the government, essentially the government had a veto, right? So that was considered the problematic part. So now when the court has struck something down, how do you bring it back? Legally, the way you bring it back is where you address the issue that the court had red flagged. That, in legalese we say remove the basis for the judgment, right? So you address that core issue and you bring it back. I'm not saying that's the foolproof way, but that is setting the stage. Maybe there will be another round of constitutional litigation, but that is one way you reintroduce it. And the second part of it is, so that way could be by shifting that veto to the Chief Justice, saying the primacy still lies with the judiciary. So we're really not encroaching. We're just having a foot in the door. So that's one possible way that the government has discussed versions of this in the past. In fact, even when the NJAC hearing was happening, this was a compromise situation that some people proposed. But at that time, I don't think those negotiations happened. The hearing was very fraught. The climate was not such that the government could have, or the court could have, done that.
But would you say there are more takers for it now? As in, has the perception of the NJAC changed a bit?
So it's not as if, the issue is only fixing judicial appointments. If you look at Justice Varma's judicial track record, there's some fine judgments. There were never any questions before. So far, he's had a really good track record. So when this incident happens, it's not as if this doesn't happen with bureaucrats or somebody else, right? I don't think the root cause is appointments. But over the years, the perception on NJAC, even within the judicial circles, has tilted. Even the judges who ruled in favor of striking down the NJAC, after they retired in speeches, did go around and say, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should have brought back NJAC. But, the fact is also that the collegium system has now been around for more than 30 years. And there are some obvious cracks that are open for everybody to see, right? Say, Saurabh Kirpal, for example. The government has just refused to appoint him as a judge, even when the court has reiterated his name multiple times. And that's just one example and probably a well-known example, but there are many, many, many such cases. So it may not be anyone's case that the collegium system is actually working just fine. So with that fatigue, do you want to look to the other side? Possibly. This is also something that is felt in some quarters of the judiciary. So politically, let's see how it plays out, because the vice president is a lawyer himself and someone who has been very vocal on this issue. So whether there'll be fresh consensus building, whether the opposition parties will now support such a move, because 2015 was a different time and, now it might be a different response from different political parties, how they all come together. So these are all things that we should look out for.
And next we talk about the farmers' protests. On the 19th of March, Punjab Police began clearing the Shambhu and Khanauri borders, where farmers had been protesting for over a year. During the crackdown, over 1,000 farmers were detained, including the Kisan Mazdoor Morcha leader Sarwan Singh Pandher and Samyukt Kisan Morcha non-political leader Jagdeep Singh Dhaliwal, who has been on a fast on to death since November. Now what's striking is that just hours before the crackdown, state authorities had in fact assured farmer leaders that no such action would be taken. To tell us more about how the police carried out this crackdown, my colleague Niharika Nanda speaks to the Indian Express's Kanchan Vasdev.
Kanchan, can you remind our listeners what exactly have the farmers been demanding during their year-long protest at the Shambhu and Khanauri borders?
They have a number of demands. So these are the implementation of the Swaminathan Commission recommendation and pension for the farmers and farm labourers, no hike in electricity tariff, withdrawal of police cases, in those cases the Red Fort violence, and justice for the victims of Lakhimpur Kheri violence. Then they've also been demanding reinstatement of the Land Acquisition Act 2013 and the compensation of the families of farmers who died during previous agitation in 2020. These are the demands, and besides that, the major one is legal guarantee of MSP and debt waiver. So these are the major ones.
And Kanchan, can you describe to us how both the farmer protest sites were cleared last week?
The police had launched a crackdown, detained over 1,000 farmers from both Shambhu and Khanauri border points. And their temporary structures that they had constructed over past 1 year, those were bulldozed with the help of JCB machines. Then these people were taken to different police stations and to the commando center in Bahadurgarh, where they stayed the night, most of the farmers, and some of them were asked to leave on their own and join their families if they were from the nearby villages. And at both the places, different police officers, they were heading the operation, which took quite a few hours because there were tractor trolleys parked on both the sides of the highways. Then there were temporary structures like shanties the farmers had set up. So those had to be demolished and bulldozed. So it required quite a few hours for them to do that.
Were the farmers given any warnings or were they told that they can leave voluntarily?
Yes, the police officers heading the operation at both the border points, they had made an appeal to the farmers over the microphones saying that they can leave on their own because the police has taken control of the border points and they won't be allowed to sit there the next morning. And if they will continue to sit there, then the police will have to detain them. The police officer had also told them that arrangements would be made for them to reach their house safely. They were told that they would be dropped at the nearest bus station so that they can catch a bus for their village. And they were also told that if an elderly farmer needs any help, a police party could drop them home. They were basically asked to leave. Many farmers, they did not resist, but some did. And those who resisted, they were forcibly detained and the border was cleared.
Also, there were talks held between the leaders of the protest and the centre. So what happened there? Were they conclusive?
See, there have been 7 meetings in a row ever since the farmers have been sitting on a dharna at these two borders. And the talks have been remaining inconclusive for the 7th time in a row this time. Their major demand has been a legal guarantee of MSP on all the crops. And the farmer leaders have been saying that the demand was doable as the centre had to spend only 25,000 crore for this. You know, Punjab alone gets about 70,000 crore every year for MSP on 2 crops. But the farmers have been saying 25,000 crore. So it sounds like a very small amount compared to what Punjab alone gets for the 2 crops. So the ministers had then asked the state farmers to provide them the report on the basis of which they have been seeking MSP of 25,000 crore because they think it's not doable. So the ministers were not satisfied with the report that the farmers had given them this time. So they called it a one-sided study, saying that there were rough calculations and all that, and told the leaders that they would have to discuss it with all the stakeholders, including the consumers and the traders also. They said, what if the traders would refuse to lift their crop? Then what would be done? So they had some questions. So they have now called another meeting on the 4th of May, which will be held again in Chandigarh. And then maybe some solution will emerge.
And Kanchan, did you get to talk to the farmers that were detained?
Not the ones that who have been detained, because the police did not allow them to take the cell phones. But there were other farmers who went home, and now they are trying that the village starts protesting with them against the police action and all that. So they are really, really upset. They are saying that farmers are backstabbed, as the leaders had gone to Chandigarh for a meeting with the central ministers. And then they were tricked into getting detained, when they were coming back home, when they entered, they were coming back to the border points. Then they entered Punjab territory, and from there they were followed by the police and, flagged down, and then they were detained. So the farmers have not liked this, that this is what has been done to them. They're saying that had they been detained from the border, the other farmers, the supporters, they would not have allowed the police to pick them up like this. But they somehow sort of rendered them leaderless, so that, there is no protest.
And can you tell us a bit more about the police action against the protest leaders, Sarwan Singh Pandher and Jagjit Singh Dhaliwal?
See, as I have already said, that when they were returning from the meeting, they were flagged down on the way, and the drivers who were driving their vehicles, they were asked to leave, and the police took control of their vehicles from where they were driven. Like this farmers' leader, Jagjit Singh Dhaliwal, who was on fast unto death for last 115 days, he was going back by an ambulance, which was the Punjab government's ambulance. So his ambulance was also stopped on the way, and the driver was changed, and the police took control, and he was also taken to the Bahadurgarh Commando Training Center. But there was no lathi charge, there was no force used. It was just that, they took control of it, their vehicles, and then they drove them.
And Kanchan, do we know what role did the AAP-led Punjab government play in all of this?
Actually, there is a lot of speculation that former Delhi Chief Minister and National Convener of AAP, Arvind Kejriwal, he held a meeting with traders in Ludhiana. Ludhiana is going to assembly by-poll in coming months. It has to be done before July 11th. So when Arvind Kejriwal was meeting the traders, they told him that their protest is causing huge losses to them because the freight prices have gone up, the transport trucks have to take a detour, they have to leave the highway and they have to go through the villages. So nobody's wanting to come to Punjab to deliver goods or, transport them to other parts of the country. So all this happened. So that is why it is said that Arvind Kejriwal wanted that the government should launch a crackdown. And also it was being felt that the protest is now losing the public support. So that is why it came at this time. Anyway, the farmers have been sitting there for more than a year now. So the crackdown happened only now.
So Kanchan, this is the second time in the last couple of years that we are seeing such a large-scale farmers' protest, which is followed by inconclusive talks with the centre and then police action. So how do we see this conflict playing out now? What's likely to be the way forward?
See, after this crackdown now, the public has been made to feel that law of the land is prevailing. Because people were getting really sick of these protests. Every other day, some farmer union would announce a protest. Somebody would do a rail roko. Somebody would march to Chandigarh. And somebody would sit at the border points. There was no day, when we did not see a protest in Punjab. So it is now being felt that after this crackdown, now the farmers, they would think twice before sitting on a protest. They will think that, they would have to know when to withdraw. In this case also, had the farmers withdrawn little earlier and they would have just continued with this fast unto death, then they wouldn't have to face this crackdown at all. This has happened because this became very long. Dialogue was also going on and the protest also continued. So now still the farmers are very angry. They are saying that they are not going to keep quiet. And they are also thinking that all the outfits will now get united. So it remains to be seen what actually happens. But it appears that with the crackdown, and we were also thinking that after the crackdown, the entire farming community would be out on the roads in the state the next morning. But that didn't happen.
And in the end, we talk about the Kunal Kamra controversy. A stand-up act by comedian Kunal Kamra has now triggered a series of events in Mumbai, from police action and political backlash to even property damage. Kamra's video titled Naya Bharat, which he uploaded on his YouTube channel on Sunday, features a segment where he refers to Maharashtra Deputy Chief Minister Eknath Shinde as Gaddar or traitor. The clip prompted Mumbai police to register an FIR against Kamra, who has now been booked under sections of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, including charges related to defamation and public mischief. The complaint filed by Shiv Sena MLA Murji Patel claims that Kamra's remarks defamed Shinde and tried to provoke tensions between political groups. Meanwhile, leaders from the ruling Shiv Sena BJP alliance, including Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis, weighed in, saying that while stand-up comedy and satire are part of democratic expression, personal attacks and provocative remarks need to have their limits.
जिस प्रकार से स्टैंड अप कॉमेडियन कामरा इन्होंने एक गीत के माध्यम से महाराष्ट्र के पूर्व मुख्यमंत्री और विद्यमान उप मुख्यमंत्री श्री एकनाथ शिंदे जी को अपमानित करने का प्रयास किया है, ये गलत है। हम इसकी निंदा करते हैं। ऐसी चीजों को सहन नहीं किया जा सकता। कामरा को
Also, in another major development, over 35 Shiv Sena activists yesterday reportedly stormed the Unicontinental Hotel in Khar where the show was recorded. In a video of the incident, they were seen shouting slogans, allegedly manhandling staff, and vandalizing property, including the Habitat studio where the performance took place.
तो आज वायरल हुआ है, ये वीडियो किसने बनाया? यहाँ पे हुआ है, यहीं पे हुआ है। एक या दो ये सब फेंक चल उठा फेंक।
Following the incident, the local police arrested 12 people and detained several others for questioning. FIRs were registered against multiple individuals for unlawful assembly and property damage. But later in the day, the BMC proceeded to launch a demolition drive against the comedy venue, claiming that it had unauthorized structures. In the aftermath, the Habitat studio issued a statement expressing concern over venues being repeatedly targeted instead of performers. They announced a temporary closure and called for a wider public dialogue on how creative spaces can function without facing legal or physical threats. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and was produced by Niharika, Nanda and me, Shashank Bhargava. If you liked the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.